Question 97 of the secundae. The topic for today is temptation of God, and I am Dr. Thibault. So we're finally moving into a new section. If you've been following this question by question, we are in the section of justice, the cardinal virtue of justice. We are looking at the parts of justice, which include the virtue of religion. And now, since religion is a moral virtue, it exists in its perfection as a means. Therefore, there's an excess, which is superstition, and then there's irreverence, or irreligion, which is the deficiency. So when we're looking at irreligious activities, the first one is, and St. Thomas breaks them into irreligious by word and irreligious by deed, and each category has two. So we're looking at irreligious by word, which is first is the temptation of God. So to tempt is to test the person tested. Almost kind of a tongue twister. To tempt is to test the person tested. To probe another's prudence, will, or power. In some sense, temptation is associated, especially in the last article, with doubt. So if one is tempting, one is in some sense doubting. So why would you tempt God? Because you need proof, right? You're looking for proof. So you're tempting God to reveal himself. You're looking to tempt God to reveal some knowledge or God's will. It's not trust in God's will, but to ascertain what God's will is. So it's in some sense not faith and hope, but doubt, which is the irreligious part of this. If you recall, the virtue of religion is giving to God what is due. So if you are tempting, you are not giving what is due, you're giving less than what is due. Now, this happens explicitly and implicitly. It's how St. Thomas is very methodical. So explicitly, this can be done by word. When he is asking something of God with the intention of probing God's knowledge, power, or will. So this can be done in prayer, right? If a person prays, they could be praying for some type of revelation of the power, will, and knowledge of God. Or one could do it by deed. And this would be an experiment on God's power, goodwill, or wisdom. So this is sometimes, it's hard to know more explicitly. This might be something that maybe somebody who has a certain level of perhaps immaturity might get caught into doing, this idea of saying, I don't really know if God exists, but if you exist, God, show me a sign, right? Show me a sign. And it can go from any degree, from expecting a big sign to a small sign. People can make kind of bets with God, right? If you show me a sign, I'll believe in you, right? So this again is coming clearly from a point of doubt, as we see later on. It's not giving to what is due to God, which isn't a test. To test someone isn't the best approach. In some ways, it's not terrible, though, which we get into in the last article, but because at least there's some level of trying, right? It's not, if one's prays to God, God, help my unbelief. St. Augustine, I believe, Lord, help my unbelief. Well, if you're praying for God to interfere in your life and to give you faith, in some sense, there's already some faith that's in there. Um, this, though, isn't specifically asking for faith, it's asking for proof, which is, the opposite of faith. Um, Now, it can be done implicitly, which is something which has no other use than to prove God's power, goodness, or knowledge. Um, for this, St. Thomas gives the example of somebody who's riding a horse. If you're galloping to get, you force your horse to gallop to get out of danger, well, then there's a reason for that. Now, if you're just going down the path and you decide to make your horse gallop, well, the only reason you would do that would be to test the horse's speed or power or endurance. There's no other there's no other reason to make the horse gallop than to implicitly test it, right? Even if you're not aware of that. Um, we could, I guess, metaphorically do that to God as well. The other example we have from this would be well, is this last part, which is towards the end of St. Thomas's answer within the I answer that part. And it's that a man tempts God if having the means at hand without reason, he chooses a dangerous course, trying whether he can be delivered by God. Um, this is probably the most common of Christians. Maybe people test God a lot in prayer too. I suppose he probably this whole question is probably much more common with people in the pews than we realize. There's this kind of classic story, and I'm sure everybody's heard it by now. But the person who's there's a flood coming, and they're on their roof and they're trapped, and they're praying to God to be saved from this flood. And somebody comes by in a boat, and offers them a lift, and they say, no, thanks, I'm praying. God will take care of it. And then somebody comes by with a bigger boat. And, no, I'm all set. God will take care of it. Somebody comes by with a helicopter. No, I'm okay. God. Then the person drowns and then says to God, well, why didn't you save me? He said, well, I sent you two boats and a helicopter. Uh, right. This is the temptation of God, right? Um, uh, other examples. Uh, but people who do unhealthy things, uh, risky lifestyles, with the idea of, oh, God takes care of me. I don't need to watch my diet. I don't need to avoid drugs. I don't need to worry about avoiding alcohol. I can smoke. I can do whatever I want. God takes care of me. Well, St. Thomas is saying if you have the means within your own hands to do something about this, uh, and for no good reason, you are deciding, well, no, I don't have to take care of myself because God will take care of it for me. Well, uh, that's tempting God, right? Tempting God. This is almost an exact line from Jesus's temptation in the desert. Throw yourself from the cliff, and the angels will catch you. Well, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God, right? Um, don't put God in a situation where you're testing God's ability to save you. Don't jump off the cliff. That's the trick. Is tempting God a sin? Article 2. Yes. Now one never tests. One never tests that of which one is certain. Not the line. The temptation proceeds from some ignorance or doubt either in the tempter or in others. Now, this is the distinguishing element of this question. The objections kind of hinge on this. Look at the apostles. Look at, we could go down the list of people from the Old Testament, right? Uh, Testing, I will prove to you that my God is the true God, right? This happens multiple times. Or the miracles that the that are performed by the apostles. They pray for these miracles. Well, they say, well, aren't they testing God? And St. Thomas's answer is the people throughout Scripture who ask for these signs, who are holy, are people who absolutely believe and don't need any additional evidence, right? They don't need the sign is not for them, but they do it in order to convince the other people in the crowd, and to kind of, in some sense, in the New Testament, to validate their ministry, right? I'm preaching about a guy who rose from the dead, um, who sent me forward to heal the sick and to cast out demons and to baptize in his name. Well, it's going to be embarrassing if God sends you out that way, and what He's asked you to do, you can't do, right? So to ask for it for the sake of other people's belief would be okay, because there's just too many examples for it not to be okay. But it's not doubt on their part. It's to convince doubters that He is who He is, and obviously you should try to convince them through reason and through your positive example of living. There's a lot of other ways to do it other than through miracles, but sometimes the Lord chooses to prove it through miracles when a saint asks, when it's useful, when it's there's an advantage to it, and the Lord decides that that is the way to bring people to Himself is through a particular miracle. Well, then that's how the Lord does it. Then people are allowed to participate in that. And I tend to think if you're the type of saint who can call God to do that type of miracle, you'll know it. I know. I have no indication that I have the ability to call forth a miracle to prove God's existence to anyone. So I'm not going to try. I'm not going to do that. I don't feel that I haven't felt that gift. I can't. I can imagine most people probably have not. Um, Temptation is opposes religion. Well, this is an important part, and I think is really at the heart of why this is a sin, because doubt itself is really not a sin, right? For a person to have doubts, they're not, strictly speaking, in sin just because they have doubts. But if one, St. Thomas points out, to tempt God is to pray to Him inordinately. I think that's a wonderful line. It almost sounds like something St. Augustine would have said. Um, to pray to God for a sign is to pray to God, but it's not praying to God to give God God's due. It's not to pray to God to give God reverence. It's to pray to God to have God act in a particular way for your benefit. Well, that's inordinate. It's not the proper order. God doesn't exist for us. We exist to please Him. So that you have to put it in the right order. Um, and if you tempt a person, it pertains to an irreverence, right? At the beginning, I accidentally said irreverence instead of irreligious. I think but I was stuck on Article 3. It's irreverence. It's irreverent to tempt God. It's irreverent to say, I don't know if I really believe in you, but if you show me, then I will believe. It's a bit irreverent, right? Um, in some ways, it's a little bit of the response God has to Job after Job's long complaint. God's response, "Who are you to question me?" Right? It's really the response. Um, so the problem is really irreverence. If you if you presume that you are in a position to demand God to show Himself to you in order for you to believe, you've really put the, the universe in the wrong order, so to speak. Um, so to tempt God is irreverent, thus it is a sin against religion, right? Because religion is giving God God's due, and if you are challenging God, if you are doubting God, if you are testing God, you are not being reverent to God, which is what is due to God is reverence. So the last question, which is a worse sin? Superstition, which is the excess of religion, or irreligion, irreligious activity, which is the deficiency in religion. And the final conclusion St. Thomas comes to is that superstition is worse. Now, this is kind of interesting, and I think it's relevant for modern day apologetics. Um, Among the sins opposed to religion, the more grievous is that which is more opposed to the reverence due to God. So, what opposes reverence more? Being superstitious or irreligious? Um, St. Thomas says being superstitious. Now, this is quite a challenge to religious people because I think sometimes religious people can often get a little bit superstitious, right? We can we can often get prone to superstitious religious activity, right? The kind of religious piety one has is a virtue, but it can be taken to such an extreme. You know, when sometimes these are mentally ill people, so I don't mean to judge mentally ill people, but sometimes you might see in a church somebody who's wearing one of each of the scapulas and a miraculous medal and an Our Lady of Guadalupe pin and a giant crucifix and and the list goes on and on and on. And every one of the saint medals that they could find, they got the Saint Benedict medal, they got the Saint Peregrine medal, they got the Saint Rita medal, they got every medal that there is. And they walk around and they're very, very pious. And there's often some level of mental illness or other type of deficiency in some way. Perhaps they are far more holy than I will ever be, so there's no moral judgment on them, for me, of this hypothetical person I'm talking about. But um, devotion is wonderful. If you feel like you need to have every one of the medals around your neck because, well, this one will keep me from cancer, and this one will keep my kidneys safe, and this one will keep my lungs safe, and this one will keep my muscle pain safe. If you feel like if you don't have the medal, then you're going to get sick in some way, or you got to wear each of the scapulas, all the scapulas. It can be taken to a superstitious level where all of this stuff now is going to be more your savior than trust in God and divine providence. Right? As we pointed out earlier, as St. Thomas pointed out earlier, um, you can go too far even in worship to the one true God. You can, you know, uh, devotion in an external fashion can go so far that it can be worse. Um, it can be worse. You can say, how could you be too religious? Well, you can. St. Thomas says you can be too religious in some sense. Even to the one true God, you can be too religious. But what you cannot really go to excess on is faith, hope, and love. Right? We talk about the Mass. Well, the Mass, we call it the Mass because of the final words of the Mass um, are part of the dismissal, which is to be sent forth. So the Mass means to be sent forth, to be sent out into the world. So why do we go to Mass? To be sent out, right? Is Protestants might go to services or like that, but Catholics go every Sunday or every day to Mass in order to be sent out into the world. So if you become so trapped in the externals of religion, you're not being properly sent out. So I know this is a long explanation, but superstition can trap you in a way, whereas if you are testing the Lord your God, it's ultimately rooted in doubt, and to doubt in some sense is a little bit more okay, right? To say I don't know, right? To be properly agnostic, properly speaking agnostic, to say I don't know, right? That is in some sense more true to what the real faith is. I know that might sound contradictory, but the essence of God, far beyond us, right? Far beyond it. We can't even pray to the essence of God, as St. Thomas has pointed out, right? Because it's just so far beyond what we could understand. We can't even pray for the essence of God, to the essence of God, um, because we're so unaware of it and incapable of even possibly comprehending a small piece of it. We can only really respond to God's goods He has presented to us in this world. Um, his relationship with us, we can have some comment on in terms of prayer, but God's essence is so far beyond us. The final judgment is so far beyond us. Who will God save? Whoever God wants to save. Right. Some of this is so far beyond us um, that some level of unknowingness is actually proper faith. Right. That's the whole purpose of faith, is that it's unknown. Right? It's belief in the unknown. So to have doubt and faith kind of they kind of go they're similar in species, right? Proper faith, true faith, has some level of doubt to some degree. It's not as offensive of saying, I know, I am certain about God, and I know about God, and I know this. That, properly speaking, is idolatry, right? What is worse than doubt or idolatry? Idolatry. That's what St. Thomas is saying here. Superstition is prone to idolatry. Idolatry is worse than doubt. So, taking this again to uh, an apologetic level, when we're dealing with people with doubt, people with a lack of faith, it's better than people who are superstitious, right? It's better than religious people who become obsessed with things that are non-essential. Um, you want to move beyond doubt. You want to move beyond testing of the Lord to proper religion, which was reverence given to God, to whom it is due. That's the proper. But there can still be some level of unknowingness there. So to move from absolute unknowingness to relative unknowingness is an easier move than certainty, which is the role of the idolater, certainty. Um, Perhaps some of this I overspoke a little bit, but I think that this is ultimately part of the spirit of what St. Thomas is talking about. If not, please correct me. To tempt, conclusion, to tempt is a test of the person tempted. Uh, to tempt God, to test God, is properly a sin, because what is due to God is reverence. And to tempt God is not, to test God is not reverent. Um, and then lastly, to doubt is better than to be falsely certain. It's better to be a doubter than an idolater. So that's all we have for this question. A very interesting one. And next time we move on to perjury, the other of the uh, uh, deficiencies of religion which deal with words and perjury.